I all of a sudden would hear her, and it was as if like a person is like standing next to me and we're having a conversation. Like I would hear her voice.
After leaving the corporate 9-to-5 grind, I became the boss of my own spiritual business, helping others explore and navigate the human experience from insight, wisdom, and lessons learned along the way. Today, I help aspiring spiritual entrepreneurs gain the confidence to share their gifts with the world. Welcome to the Happy Healing Shop podcast. I'm your host, Trang Pham Nguyen, and each week we'll dive into incredible stories of strength, resilience, and transformation. So, if you are ready for some serious breakthroughs, laughs and tears, and stories that will inspire you, you are in the right place, my friend. Let's get started. In today's deeply and meaningful episode, I am bringing together a special panel of guests to engage in a candid and enlightening discussion on a topic that often remains in silence, but universally touches us all, no matter what race, religion, or culture you come from. The profound experience of grieving after the loss of a loved one. The intricacies of death and the grieving process can be difficult to navigate, yet they hold a transformative power that shapes the understanding of our own existence. So today's episode is meant to shine a compassionate light on this often misunderstood journey of grief and offering solace to those who may be on this path. In a world where conversations about death can be uncomfortable or met with stigma, we're here to unravel the layers of grief, revealing its various forms and exploring the diverse ways these individuals find strength to navigate through it. Please welcome Davina, Micah, Catherine, Omega, and Shaw. Welcome, everyone, to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
So, yes, the topic of death, something that doesn't sound too happy, but can we, to kind of introduce this and give a little backstory, could you guys maybe briefly explain, like, how did your loved ones pass away and how long ago it was?
Sure. Happy to start. My dad passed away November of 2021. Passed away from a heart attack, and our family was on vacation actually. Maybe second or third day into the vacation, and while we were out snorkeling, unfortunately, he suffered from a heart attack while we were out on the water. So, tried to make it back to land and then the hospital in time, but unfortunately, we just didn't do enough within the amount of time that we had. So about a year and almost 2 years now.
I had the same. My dad passed from cardiac arrest, but he was sick for a long time. So it was expected, but unexpected in that manner.
My mom passed in 2015, and she had early onset Alzheimer's disease. So she got it in her like early 50s, maybe like late 40s. And that whole progression was maybe about like 8-9 years maybe that she was sick. So it was something that was like a really prolonged experience.
My sister, she passed in 2020 of stage 4 cancer. It was in the lungs and then it spread. We did not know ahead of time. And so it was literally, we found out in November 2019, and then she passed in February 2020. So it definitely was a shock and sudden.
So I've lost many people to varying types of like diseases throughout my childhood. And then I lost a friend to suicide in high school, and then a partner in 2020 to a brain tumor that came on pretty quickly. So it was like something that I knew was going to happen, but it was it progressed very quickly.
And I lost my mom. She pretty much had surgery in the hip area, and she just never woke up from that surgery. So it became a vegetable state. And then they're like, I think it's best we put her in hospice and then just let her die naturally. So what did grieving honestly look like for you guys? You know, some people shut down, some people feel all the feels.
I feel like for me, I kind of have like an avoidant personality. So I don't process things right away. I kind of pretend they don't exist. And then it hits me a long time later. So the first probably month, I don't even think I cried. And like I said, it was kind of expected, but unexpected in the manner. But now 4 years later, I will have periods where it just hits you all of a sudden, and I'll have like whole days where I'll cry off and on, but I don't think about it really every day. Some days.
Yeah, for me, I don't think about my dad's passing every day, but he comes to mind pretty often for me, just in the different parts of life that you recognize. I recognize that, reminded me of my dad. But in terms of the grieving process, I thought his passing, while unfortunate in the sense that we lost him a lot sooner than we thought we would, it was fortunate in that he passed away in like the best of possible circumstances. He was really healthy, so it was unexpected. And he passed away while enjoying a family vacation with his friends. Like I remember coming out of the water from snorkeling, and he was taking a picture with my mom, and happy as a clam. So it was fortunate in the sense that he didn't have to worry or think about his passing. It was more sudden, and it happened. And I don't know what if there is a best way to go, but I think that barring passing away in your sleep, passing away from a heart attack on a vacation with your family is not too bad. So um, I take solace in the fact that he wasn't in pain leading up to his passing.
Do you think that helped you, how do I word this, grieve faster in a way, or kind of accept his
Yeah.
death?
Yeah, and I think it helped a lot of people, especially in my family, grieve. It helped the process a lot more because we had the fortune of not watching him, in a hospital bed, right? He was the picture of who we always expected him to be at the time of his passing, right? So yes, I do think that not having him go through prolonged suffering was helpful in all of our grieving processes, me and my family.
And for speaking of laying in hospital for a long time, so like Catherine, I know that your mom kind of took a long time to go. Do you feel like that made the grieving process a lot longer for you, or was it kind of like a sense of relief, or a mix of both?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I've thought about that a lot over the years. I was grieving the whole time she was ill, as well as after. So I would say that it was at least a decade that I was just in this sort of consistent state of grieving. It just kind of wavered in intensity. When she finally had passed, there was like a sense of relief for sure. Because it was like, okay, the thing we were so afraid of has finally happened. So that was very difficult. And there was a long time there that I almost like didn't know who I was, because I was just clouded by this like depression that completely consumed all of me. So I remember feeling like often like, I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm just like this sad person. And it was just, in retrospect, there are things about it that, like Omega is talking about, like what a blessing that his dad wasn't like suffering and like went quickly. In retrospect, when I look back, as difficult as that was for me and my family, I think for me, like an overnight sort of death like that would have sent my system in a shock. Like I think I might have actually died. So when I look back and I see think about like how things played out, despite it being like really horrific, I don't know that like I physically could have handled like a heart attack or something like that. I think I probably would have also passed. So but that's something you don't see until time passes. So yeah, it was a really unusual time, and it was in my early 20s and all through my 20s, which is like the time you're supposed to be like launching out into the world, trying to figure out who you are. But I always kind of had like this weight pulling me back with all this, like these family circumstances. So it was very difficult. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I'm still haunted by memories. Over time they get less and less, but occasionally I'll just get these flashes of like just really painful memories. So yeah, it was very difficult.
I think with my mom, it wasn't like years like yours, but it was like 2 months and felt like 2 long months. And for me, I had to deal with so much more of like family politics and, what to do with the body. And some people had their own, I wouldn't say ulterior motives, but just more of like, well, they factored in religion too. So in my family, it was like the older people, like aunts and uncles, telling my dad what to do versus the younger people, which we were more like believed in science and like, you just gotta, she's done, and my dad was just kind of teeter-tottering between both worlds in that sense. And so from my situation, I was more relieved that it was over, and I did not feel guilty about it at all. I know some people would, but I was just like, I'm tired of dealing with all this, and just please let it be over so my dad can, even though he's so sad, but at least I don't have to deal with the doctors calling, being like, what do you want to do with the body? Like we need hospital beds. It's kind of in the middle of COVID time too. And dealing with all that stress. So Shaw and Micah, I know you've lost someone due to illness and it was sudden. Well, with Shaw, was it the brain tumor also sudden as well?
He knew that something was wrong and he kept putting it off because his mother was sick. So in a way it was kind of sudden, because when he finally got tested, it was like inoperable and he had maybe a couple months left. But it was something that I think he'd known for a few years. So it wasn't sudden for him, but I think for everyone else, since he was kind of trying to avoid it and hide it for so long. And then within about 2 months, he went downhill extremely fast. That he actually had kind of asked me if it was okay for him to let go, and he died the day after my birthday. So I think he was kind of trying to hold on, and then it just one day it was over.
I'm curious, Shaw, did that give you like a sense of relief? Him asking you and you sort of telling him it's okay, and then him passing on soon after that, like in a sense that he was holding on for other people, but by you telling him that it was okay, it gave him the signal that, okay, it's fine. I don't have to hold on anymore.
Yeah, I think so, because watching him suffer was horrible. And I think also knowing that he was trying to hold on for me and that he felt guilty for dying, I guess, because of me, that was pretty rough. So being able to tell him that it was okay was kind of like a major weight was lifted.
Yeah, I relate to um, a little bit of what Shaw is saying in regards to um, we didn't know, and my sister said she didn't know, um, but then looking back, we're all just kind of wondering. We don't have any proof whether she did, but we all are just wondering if maybe she did, and we were the ones maybe that were it was a little bit sudden for, but um, it just really it was really difficult because it just everything out of the blue, everything was just going so fast. Like Trang, there were a lot of family politics, a lot of coming from a strict religious background in our family. Half the family was not wanting that involved. The other half of my family did want it involved, having to help my mom put the service together because her children weren't up to it and requested that we do it, having no experience doing that. So everything just was felt so fast. And I was glad at the end that she wasn't suffering when I last saw her, because she passed the day after my mom and me came to see her to say goodbye. So I was really just grateful she wasn't suffering at the end, like my dad did, because I watched my dad suffer till the very last breath. So
And Shaw, with the one where you mentioned with the death that you knew for suicide, do you feel like that death feels a lot different than the other ones? Because there might be layers of like, I could have done more, or
Definitely. So it was in high school, I think the last couple years. I don't remember, maybe junior year. But there was definitely, I think for all of us who were friends with him, this feeling of guilt, like we should have known. It was a complete surprise. And some people were hoping it was an accident, but I think it was an overdose on medications, and it was so much that it was like unlikely that it could have been an accident. So, and I think a lot of us, or a couple of us, felt really guilty because he had been acting like a complete jerk a couple days before, and we called him out on it. So then after he passed, we all blamed ourselves, even though like we had no way of knowing, and letting people be jerks to you is not, you know, or calling them out on it is not your fault with how they handle it, unless you're a jerk about it, I guess. But so yeah, it was definitely a different kind of grief.
for everyone here, what is something you wish people did or offer when you were going through a difficult time?
I think everybody is, vastly different. That's what I struggle with too, even after having people in my life that have passed away, because since everybody does cope with it different, you don't really know how to make that situation pleasant for that specific person. So like for me, I didn't really want anybody to reach out to me because it did feel very fake. Like just text me and say, oh, how's your day going? Like ask me questions and be genuine. Don't just text me or message me on Facebook when I haven't even seen you or talked to you in years and say you're sorry and all the generic things like, is in a better place now, or, I'm so sorry. And I think I felt like I had to be more sad than I was because people projected that on me. Like I kind of felt guilty for not feeling as bad as people expected me to feel because of the things they said to me. So they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, and I'm like, no, it's fine. because he was suffering for so long. And I'm like, I would tell him, like, go, like, you can go now. But people don't really see it that way.
I think what was probably the most jarring thing was when my dad got to the hospital, and maybe 2 minutes after the doctor told us or announced the time of death, me and my brother who were in the hospital with my dad, we were just starting to get bombarded with text messages on Facebook here and there. And it's like, we barely learned our father passed away, and suddenly people from the church community, friends all over the place were just, sending their condolences, which, I don't mind, because that's typically what people do when somebody passes away. But we were just so shocked at how quickly that news got out, how quickly it spread. And I think I would have appreciated a just general recommendation for everybody, probably within the first 24 hours, maybe, for me at least. Don't text me, please. I've got a lot of things to think about, and I just don't have the time to listen to my phone ring or buzz for 24 hours, people sending in condolences.
Yeah, I have to agree with that for sure. And I actually remember my experience and like very vividly. So now whenever there's like a death in my network or around, I'm very intentional about like, give them space. Don't reach out, maybe wait until the funeral or after, like just give people space. It's such a like jarring experience. And then to build off the question, I really wish that people, and I know this is very cultural too, that they just had the capacity to like share space with you in like those grieving moments, and to like be able to just hear you talk about like death, like the fact that it's such a jarring experience, without feeling guilty, right? Like without feeling guilty that you're all of a sudden making them uncomfortable. Like I wish people had that capacity, but even people who have lost people don't always have that capacity. So I know it's like a very difficult thing to hold in our bodies and our minds and our emotions, but I just remember feeling so isolated during that time. And I often looked to people who were like much older than I was, because they had lost many people, right? So they were a little bit more experienced and a little bit more wise. Not always, but there were some key players. So yeah, that was my experience.
I think for me, if I don't tell someone about it, I don't really want them to text me out of the blue, because then it just brings stuff up. And then when someone else is going through it, I kind of do what I want from people, and I will ask them if they want me to give them space or if they need someone to talk to. Because I know sometimes like people want to be there for you, but you just want space, or vice versa. Like, some people want to give you space, but you really just need someone there. So I ask them, and I let them know, like, if anything changes, just let me know. Like, if you decide, no, you don't, you just, you suddenly don't want to talk to anybody, I'm not going to be hurt. Whatever you need, just let me know.
That's a smart way how to keep it open-ended for them.
I wish that people would have refrained from judgment and how they felt I needed to grieve. And to just, if you really are wanting to be supportive in those moments, just let me be in my grief, judgment free, without adding all of that on top of me, given what I'm already trying to deal with and trying to process through. I think because it was just so much of that combined with one person's religious belief, another person's belief that that they're not believing in that and they're not agreeing, and you should have the funeral service this way, this is the tradition of this religion. No, in our culture this is the way we do this service. How dare you do this? I'm grieving my sister, my mom just lost her daughter. Just just have humanity, let the person grieve, just I think that's the main thing that I'm remembering the most out of going through that. So
I remember when we were at the visitation for my father, and members of the church community were coming in, and we had prayers, and my sister had created this beautiful slideshow that would run while the priest was up doing his homily and the reading, and one of the church congregation members was tapping on my shoulder saying, "Can you please turn off that TV? You shouldn't have a TV on during a mass ceremony." And I think I just in that moment I just thought I felt taken aback that you're here for, I feel like you're here for the wrong reason if the focus is more on form and tradition than it is, consoling the family or helping the family, comforting them and helping them grieve. So I totally relate to that sentiment, Micah.
I wish I was there to be like, the audacity that you have.
Turn up the volume a little higher.
I was trying not to laugh during this question, which is kind of messed up, but because Davina, when you were saying, oh, all these people are all of a sudden coming out of the blue saying, I'm so sorry. And it reminded me of like the summer yearbooks that people sign. And at the end, they all just like copy paste, like, hags, have a great summer, hags. And you're like, we don't even talk to each other in class. And so, and what you guys are talking about is like when people start doing that conversation, like, I'm so sorry, and you haven't talked to them in 5 to 10 years. And then they're like, well, do you want to hang? And you're grieving at the same time. You're like, no, I don't want to hang with you. I haven't seen you. And like, we don't even talk, So that's why when my mom passed away, well, she became a veggie state. So she didn't really diet, but at that time I told no one. And because the role I took on was the one that was like the funeral planner, the everything, the therapist for my dad, and a liaison between the hospitals and the family. So it was just, I didn't want to add another task of answering back to 50 text messages and 20 Facebook messages on top of my ongoing list of things to do. And my mom's not even dead yet, but it's like pending, like, she is, and I think at that moment would have been so helpful for me was if I just didn't know someone then, but I needed like a personal assistant. That's what I needed because of the stuff I had to take care of. But not everyone is a great personal assistant, and not everyone knows how to navigate like insurance or like all the financial stuff and legal stuff. So it was one of those things that would have been helpful, but I just didn't have that resource at that time. And also like most of Omega, most of my family's guys, they're all guy cousins, and the guy cousins and my brother are not the people you talk to when you want to talk about processing things and emotions and stuff. So they weren't really helpful in that sense. So I turned to my girlfriends, but this was like after my mom is like dying and I took care of everything, and again, like Micah, I think what you said with grieving and allowing people to grieve, like I grieved over my mom really fast. And I think people were concerned about that, or they were just like, are you just denying it or avoiding it? And for me, my parents live on the other side of, they live in Virginia. I live in LA. So it's like complete opposite. So I'm used to living a life without them in a way, except just through phone calls or text messages. So it's very limited. So that for me, it was just, I just like grieved a lot faster in that sense, but it was more so because like I had a lot of resentment with my brother, and that's really what took over the grief. So everyone was worried about me not grieving long enough. And I was like, no, why are you not worried about me and me dealing with my brother? And I still to this day have to work through that because my brother's still alive and it's like ongoing. When you guys were dealing with going through the grieving process and stuff, what are some hurtful or annoying things that people have said to you, even though you know their intention was good? And I ask this because people listening in can be like, oh, shoot, I'll make sure not to accidentally say that to a friend when that happens.
I had someone I was super close to, one of my best friends, and when I told them, they were very supportive, but after a few days, they started telling me how much they miss like the old me or how I was, they're like kind of saying that they want me to get back to being okay again. And like it was worded like it was supportive, but then I asked them, I was like, can you not say things like that to me? And they got very upset. And then after a few more days, they asked me to stop talking about my partner. They're like, asked me not to mention him anymore. And I was like, well, sorry, I'm grieving too slowly for you. And that I was like a complete wreck. I basically wasn't even a person anymore. And I was like, well, if like I understand that maybe it's awkward and not fun for you, but then maybe I'm just gonna go and do my own thing and you can deal with whatever's going on with you. Because like that just the things they started saying to me after, I was like, this is messed up and you need to go deal with your own issues.
I think for me, the most annoying thing, I didn't necessarily have anybody say anything rude, but the most annoying thing is I have a lot of siblings, and I will be the first to admit my dad was not the best person. And so none of us really had a great relationship with him. After he died, I came to discover reasons why he was the way he was. But I had a couple sisters in particular that never ever reached out to my dad and tried to have a relationship with him, would post on Facebook and, for attention, like, oh, my dad passed away and I just hope he's in a better place and I'm doing okay, but some days are hard. And it's like, girl, you never even called him. Like, good for you, but that's not right. You haven't even talked to him in years. That was the most annoying because I have a very large family, but nobody talks to each other. So they're all the way across the country, and it's just irritating when people do that. Like, don't act like you were a big part of somebody's life that you weren't.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Like the whole like performative behavior like on social media. I feel like, as a side note, I just feel like death can kind of like surface like a subconscious narcissism or something, not just with people who have like the direct people involved, but like people around, right? And it can show up on social media. I think that's like a big thing that happens that makes me really uncomfortable in general. To answer your question, Trang, no one said anything like really awful, like was like how Shaw's example, but I do remember people kind of saying like, and these are some of my older connections, but they were kind of alluding to like, oh, but I'm gonna be this like wise person now, like all this growth, right? Because of this like stuff I've had to like go through and sort of grow through. So it was almost like romanticizing the experience in a way that it's not that they weren't wrong. It was just at the time, that's not like something I could have really absorbed. It's like, give it 10 years and then maybe that you can say that to me. But at the time, it just felt like, I don't want wisdom. Like I want my mom back. Like I don't want to be an adult. I don't want to do this. So I just remember this feeling of like, oh, but like, think of all the growth and think of all this, all the upsides, how prepared for life you'll be. And I'm just like,
You're so strong.
yeah, don't say that, because even prior to her loss, I was always kind of like a little bit older than my age in a lot of ways. So that made it hard to like connect with people, I feel like. So it was just sort of like hammering down on that, you know? So yeah, it just was something that kind of made me uncomfortable. I remember at the time, just kind of romanticizing, like, you know, what is it, that saying with like diamonds are only built through pressure, like those kind of vibes. And I was like, just stop talking.
I so relate to that, Catherine. That's exactly how I was feeling too, because I was constantly being told, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and you're so strong. Like, you're gonna come through the other side. And it's like in that moment, like you were saying, no, I don't. I don't feel strong. I don't want to hear that. I'm just trying to get through the hours right now. I'm just trying to get to the next day. And I don't want to hear about I'm just so strong, like somebody in the movies or something. I'm a human being, and this just really sucks.
Yeah.
Really sucks. Like, I need to go cry now. Like, and then in a few more hours I'm gonna do it again. And then I'm gonna be really angry. And now I gotta go and we have to make copies for the service program. It's just like, you guys, like, no. Oh, I just really related to that. It's just couldn't have been said more perfectly.
Yeah, it's like too much feedback too soon, you know?
Exactly.
It's like they need to let you decide for yourself what the upsides of, if any, that experience might bring. But for
Exactly.
people to like project that onto other people, I just think that people need to not do that, you know? Yeah.
It, yeah, I was very fortunate in that I have an older sister who took, I guess, your role, Chang, of taking care of a lot of the logistics, to, making sure the body was delivered, embalmed, funeral service, setting up the service, setting up the mass. So I didn't get the brunt of all the hecticness that comes around taking care of funeral services. So I didn't get anybody saying anything to me personally that I was felt insulted by, but I know my sister did. And again, it goes back to the Vietnamese culture, which is one, traditional, but also religion, also traditional. So very, like, you got a double whammy of expectations of how things should be. And I think the one thing that stood out was my sister wasn't there with us on that vacation. So she wasn't with my dad at the time of his passing. So the one thing she wanted to do, that was very important to her, part of Vietnamese tradition, when you bring at the funeral's mass, uh, typically it is the eldest son that carries the portrait of the father, first person down the aisle. And she fought tooth and nail to be that person because she's the eldest daughter, right? She felt like this is one of my last chances to hold on to my dad. And I think a lot of the church members didn't feel that was appropriate because it's not part of tradition. But that wasn't what surprised me. It was that a lot of our family members felt the same way, not because not because they didn't think it was right, but because they were worried about what other members of the congregation would say about them, right? So it was such a selfish way of thinking, I felt, for something that, for them, you talk about it, you feel embarrassed about it for a week. But for my sister, that was really the last time she got to hold on to her dad, before, he passing away.
So, what tools, hobbies, or activities helped you with grieving, if any? Or some people, they didn't. Maybe they just had to go through a deep depression and just kind of took a long time.
This one's easy for me because me and my dad bonded over our dogs. My dad loved our dogs more than he loved his children. And I love my dogs more than I probably love some of my family members. So after he passed away, I have the two dogs right here. They're like my daily reminder that my dad is always with me. So just having them around really, really made it feel like my dad never left. One, and then two, my dad was an avid fisher. He and I would always go out to Santa Barbara. We'd take the charter boat out to go deep sea fishing, and that, anybody ever asked him to go fishing, he'd be there in a heartbeat. So I try to go fishing whenever I can, just as a way to remember him, I guess. But yeah, we had a lot of activities together that we used to do that I can always go back to do if I ever feel like I want to connect with my dad again.
I don't think I did anything. I was actually pregnant with my third child when my dad died. And as soon as he died, my mom had the realization that she could not afford to live on her own. So immediately, once we left the hospital, she stayed at our house, and a couple days she stayed with us, and I think it was like the following weekend we ended up moving all of her stuff into our house. So that was a huge adjustment. That kind of occupied all of our time, just spending time together and going through all of her stuff. And I know for her personally, it was a struggle because she had to get rid of so much stuff that her and my dad shared together because it wasn't going to fit in my house with all of my stuff. So I think that just took up a lot of our time. And, being pregnant and having two other small children, especially having a high risk pregnancy, I didn't really have time to do anything else or think about anything else. So I look at that as a little bit of a blessing that I was pregnant at the time, because I could keep my mind on something positive, like, bringing a life into the world when one just exited. So that was what I did. Make a person.
I wrote a story. I'm a writer, so I was like, I'm gonna write about two guys who fall in love and one of them is dying. But it's not gonna end real sad. It's gonna end a little weird. I don't know. So yeah, I just wrote the story, and I don't know. I think it helped me process it from like a distance almost. Because I was really not in a good place, and I was afraid that if I tried to process it like directly, that I wasn't going to be here anymore. So I wrote the story, and I think that's the main thing that kind of let me be okay enough to continue to heal on my own.
With me, I had a lot going on where I was still helping with my mom, caregiving for my mom, and also when my dad was still alive at the time when my sister passed, helping both of them, taking them to the doctor's appointments, the new health issues with my dad that sprung up, just kind of being pulled back and forth. And even though it was a lot, it did keep me busy, kept me away from home where I wouldn't have a lot of time to just think about everything. And everything went really fast with a lot of the losses I had, kind of one after the last couple of years. Every year someone left. So I still I still am trying to work through it, but the things that helped me was obviously staying busy. I didn't have a choice, but still staying busy. And there was a form of therapy, DBT therapy that I started, and that was really helpful, that I did weekly, and music.
For me, it was therapy helped a lot. I was actually connected with the therapist like not even quite a year before my mom had passed. It was like a friend of a friend, their office mate, and I was actually very lucky because she actually took me on pro bono. There was like a certain percentage of her clients that she would take on pro bono. And she really helped me. Like God bless her soul. I still have her today as a therapist. When I was able to start paying her, I did. But I mean, she would just hear me out like to a degree that just any other person couldn't, like any friend, any family member. And so it's just kind of amazing how that kind of like ongoing support helped. I also had a few medium readings with some mediums at the time who were very like financially accessible. Not so much anymore. They've gotten so like known in that community, but connecting with my mom on the other side really helped because it just made me feel like she was still around, and there were just like so many details that people just wouldn't have known. So I knew it was legitimate. And then also just like a fierce belief that I wouldn't feel depressed forever, that things at some point might get better. Like a very fierce belief. Like it was really intense because it had to match the degree of the grief that I was feeling for so many years. And I was just like, if I just like, it felt like a fight, right? It almost felt like a war that I had to win. I'm not like a particularly like competitive person, but at that time, I just remember feeling like if I let this completely take over, that's the end of me. Like there's just no building a life. There's no keeping your health in check, mentally or physically. Like you will disintegrate if you don't fight this grief. Of course, there's times you just are depressed and like are crying in a ball. But there was this underlying just like relentless like will to live that I'm really glad I stuck with. Yeah.
For those who aren't listening in, a psychic medium is someone that can connect with spirit in the afterlife, which makes me think, Davina, because you are actually a medium, did you find being able to connect with your dad or just connecting with the afterlife made it harder for you or made it easier for you?
So it's kind of weird because I don't like to connect with my family members who have passed. I actually avoid it if I can. My dad has reached out to me in my dreams. And I've noticed that when he does come to me in my dreams, he is completely different than he was when he was alive. He's just more comforting. I've had a lot of guilt since he's passed because nobody ever truly knew my dad. I found out a lot of family secrets after he died, and I I felt guilty, but also angry at him for not disclosing those to the people that he loved, because I felt like that would have helped us understand him and not been so angry at him all the time for the way he was. So, throughout my grieving process, I've always felt guilt and anger. And the last dream that I did have about him, he gave me the sense that like it was okay. Like it was fine. He He doesn't have any negative feelings now. You know, kind of gave me the understanding that that wasn't something that I could have known or pressed for more information, because in your relationships with your children, a parent can know a lot of things about their child, but I feel like children don't know a lot of things about their parents, because your parent is always there. You don't always ask your parent questions. For me, I didn't ask my dad a lot of questions about his childhood or his upbringing. I just kind of took it for granted that they were these adults that existed and were supposed to care for me. I didn't know that they had a whole other life outside of me, if that makes sense. I just feel like children are very selfish in that aspect. So realizing that my dad was a person and not just a parent after he passed, and him coming to me in my dreams definitely helps the process. But when I do have the dreams, it is a very hard day. It's a hard day the rest of the day. It's a blessing and a curse.
Speaking of dreams, for you guys, have you guys witnessed any signs from your loved ones in the afterlife of trying to contact you, whether it's dreams, hearing things, or coincidences?
So I've been actually dying to share this, because see what I did there? Dying to share this. So I actually have a very close friend that passed away. He was like my first little school crush. We were together for like 2 years in junior high, and then we continued to stay friends. So he was one of my longest, closest friends. We continued to stay friends into adulthood, and he did battle heroin addiction, and he was clean for almost a year, and he relapsed. And when he relapsed, he died. And he was only 21 at the time. And I do occasionally have dreams about him, but not last night, the night before, I actually had a dream about him. I don't remember much of the dream. I just, remember it was about him. And I was scrolling through some of like my old memories on my phone. And I realized that yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of his passing. And I didn't register that. So it was just kind of crazy to me that he came to me in a dream the day that he had passed 10 years before. And it's just so weird how souls do that. They're like, hey, remember me? I've been dead for 10 years now. Surprise, I'm here.
I had a lot of weird things happen even before my partner passed. Like, we had this weird sort of connection. Like, he would have seizures and stuff before he died, and he would text me when he felt one coming on, and I would be dead asleep, and I would wake up within 5 seconds, like before he texted me. Like, every single time I'd wake up right before he texted me. And then there were times where like I would just know what was going on. The weirdest one was I knew what he was eating. Like, I could taste what he was eating. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm just at the hospital eating. And I was like, are you eating corn chips? He's like, this is freaky. You need to stop. And I'm like, well. And then the night that he passed, like, I was a wreck and kind of having basically a panic attack. And then I suddenly felt okay. It was like, it feels like things are okay. And then like I got a text from his sister saying that he had passed away, and I was like, oh, so I feel like I felt like him, passing was like he's finally okay. And then I've had like weird random things happen that I'm like, this has to be him, because it's just like too many coincidences and weird things. So yeah. And then I also went to see a medium because I didn't really have closure, because his family is in like Utah, and he went to visit them before he passed. And he was not religious, but they were Mormon, and they were very against us dating since we were both men. And so I wasn't invited to the funeral. So I was like, I'm going to go see a medium because I need some sort of closure.
I mean, I'll have the occasional dream of my dad. I don't know if that is him specifically trying to communicate with me because I don't remember what happened in the dream afterward. It was just my dream had my dad in it. But I I I I'd like to think that I don't have a lot of signs from my dad because he's not actively watching over me. Because at the time of my dad's passing, I had probably the most closure you could possibly have with the passing of somebody you love, right? He was 70 something years old. He'd lived a full life. He knew I loved him, and I know he knew he loved me. He was proud of what I did and proud of the person I was. So when he passed away, there was nothing left for me to say that I didn't already say to my dad, and vice versa. Now, in contrast with my dad and my dad was always my sister's rock, sort of the foundation of her life. And she wasn't there when my dad passed away. She didn't get that same sense of closure that I was able to get. So she would tell me often she gets so many signs from my dad on her wedding day. A butterfly was following her around, and just a bunch of serendipitous things would happen that would otherwise normally go wrong. Like it was raining all up until her wedding day, and then on that day it was clear. Her dress wasn't ready. They told her dress would be three days late, but somehow the dress was done on time. So she swears that like all these very unlikely things happening, but happening in her favor, is the result of my dad being there to watch over her. So I like to think when a loved one passes away, they'll focus on the folks or the people in their lives who really could use that extra push or that extra help. And in my mind, I'm hoping my dad is just up there partying with all his friends who passed away before him. Like I'm hoping like he's up there drinking, having a blast. So, please, Dad, just enjoy the afterlife.
If you feel comfortable, did you want to share about the story where your dad beeping the door code?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I think that's pretty epic. I was like, what?
So my brother's home, it has a door code that you enter in, and everybody uses there's two codes you could use, a 6-digit code and a 4-digit code. So when we did a prayer for him at our house, I think it was 100 days after he died. Somebody pressed the 4-digit code, and my mom goes to open the door thinking it was me, but nobody was there. So the prevailing thought is that my dad was coming home because the only person that answers the 4-digit code is my dad. So we thought that all was, a nice little coincidence, or not. Might not have been a coincidence.
I love that.
My mom came to me in a dream. My uncle and aunt didn't, or if they did, I forgot. But my mom came in a dream and she was following my dad, and I was just observing them. And she looked at me and she said, "Why do you sleep so late?" And that was the only message she gave me. And that was it. And I was like, really? But I just remember vividly that dream and waking up being like, okay, my mom visited me. Still kind of naggy, but okay.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
That happened with me with my father because he was always just constantly down my back about, make sure when you drive, you do this. Make sure, you have to do this, you have to do that. And I mean, I can't even count. It's like 1,000 times he told me over and over again. And several times, everybody's like, oh yeah, I saw this, and then I had a dream and everything. No, my dad is like, once I'm in the car and I'm driving, several moments, and it's like, yeah, you need to do that. And I'm like, okay. So even even your spirit, you're still on me about this whole driving thing all the time. Okay. Like, I know, Dad, like, all right, I got it. So it's really funny, but it's just everything that happened. I was like, yeah, it's definitely you. I know you're doing this. I know I know you're telling me that. You're definitely with me. So I think that's where he chooses to want to show up most of the time. But I also felt like certain situations where I probably would have had an accident, I think I also felt like he was protecting me as well. So that was comforting.
And then for me, there's like so many, I won't even like take up all the time to go through them, but the biggest one was, so my mom had she kind of lost her ability to speak for several months before she actually passed. So it was almost like we developed this like, it's going to sound crazy, but almost like a telepathy or like some other sort of inner kind of communication that didn't warrant words. And then when she passed, it was like all of a sudden, and I heard, and this went on for months after, but like after she passed, it's like I all of a sudden would hear her, and it was as if like a person is like standing next to me and we're having a conversation. Like I would hear her voice to that like level.
Is this awake or asleep?
What was that?
Is this while you're awake or asleep?
I'm awake. Yeah. So I actually felt like kind of crazy for a while that I was like just imagining this voice to try to like as like a coping mechanism. But prior to that, I didn't hear this voice. It was like after she had passed, it was almost like she was gone, but it's like the same feeling I had while she was alive for a while after she had passed, it felt like she was still there. So it was almost like this connection that I kind of like followed her, like wherever she went. So I heard her voice for a long time, and she basically was kind of just reassuring me that she's still here, that, like I am here, I am around, like, and sometimes she would be like yelling at me because I would be like not believing her or something. So that lasted for a while, but yeah, the butterflies, super relatable. One thing, I feel like it depends on like the tone she's trying to like connect in. She'll kind of connect in a very specific way. So if she's trying to be like funny or like playful, she'll do something with squirrels, or it's like all of a sudden I'll want to like take a random turn or walk a certain way that I haven't normally, and then all of a sudden there's like 3 squirrels fighting, and then it's just like really funny to me. And so it's like, oh hey mom, like these like weird kind of alignments, depending on what kind of mood she's in and how she wants to communicate, she'll kind of like do it through different signs in that way. So those ones are my favorite, the squirrels.
I'm going to move it in a slightly different direction where, in the workplace, there's some companies don't have bereavement leave, or if they do, it's very, very few days, which is kind of crazy. But what would you like to tell companies or employers about grief and losing a loved ones?
I feel like I was pretty fortunate because at the time I still worked for the same person, but the office I worked at was a lot smaller. So it's kind of like a mom and pop, and I was able to just be like, hey, I gotta go. And the weird thing is that my dad actually died on my boss's birthday, and we were at work when he died. And I'm like, happy birthday. See you later. My dad is dying. But surprisingly, considering my boss is very work orientated, she was very graceful about the whole thing. After that happened, I just kept her updated and told her like, it's going to be a little bit before I come back to work. And she didn't message me for a few days. And then when she did message me, she just said, not to rush. When do you think you plan on coming back? Like, kind of put the ball in my court, which helped a lot, because you worry, am I going to have a job, or like, do I need to go back to work, because are they going to replace me, or it's affecting their company, me being out. So she was very graceful about it and gave me the time off that I needed, and was just very caring when I did come back. My favorite thing was she didn't talk to me about it. Right when I walked in the door, she wasn't like, oh my God, are you okay? It was just like, okay, let's get back to work. And I loved that. Like, I'm at work now. We're going to pretend nothing happened. So I think giving your employees the grace to like take as much time as they need. I feel like people who are grieving, they want to get back to their normal life. They don't want to be stuck in that feeling forever. So I don't know anybody that would just be like, oh, I'm not going to show up to work for like 5 months, 6 months. I think just let your employees grieve how they need to grieve.
It's funny, I work in HR, so I know exactly about bereavement leave. I one thing I would say to companies is some companies have restrictions on bereavement leave in the sense that only if it's an immediate family member or a grandparent. But I will point out that loss is loss if that person is close to you. It shouldn't be restricted to whether someone is related to you by blood or if somebody's married to you. So I get it. If you only offer 10, 15 days of bereavement, but employees should be given the freedom to use that bereavement regardless of who it is in their life that passes away.
I agree. I like some of my friends more than I like some of my family members.
It was terrible. I remember back when I started my career, we had this employee come in and asked if they could take time off because their dog of 12 years passed away, and we said no. You have to use vacation.
Oh,
Wow.
So it's tough.
I think as a bad coworker, I'd be like, just lie about it. Just say, just say your mom died and don't post anything on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't expect like businesses or the working world to be particularly wise in like human things because they're concerned about profits, like for the most part, even like the medical system. So to hear that it's like 15 days is like painful, because when I think back, when I lost my mom, it was during like college. So I had to take like some time off school. And then even shortly after that, like I was applying like crazy and wasn't getting hired for literally anything. But when I look back, I think like I realized like, oh, that was actually like grace from the universe being like, oh no, this is because you're like literally falling apart. You couldn't have held down a job. So it took me 6 months after I graduated to like get a job. And when I think back, I was like, oh yeah, that was about the time where I was like kind of functioning. So I could actually hold down a job. But I don't think companies are very unlike, just regular people in a lot of ways. They don't really want to talk about death. They don't know how to like deal with it. I mean, your only hope is maybe HR. If you have like nice bosses, like Davina, sounds like you did, that always helps. Like that's probably what you need the most is like your most immediate bosses. Because those are like the ones you're dealing with the most,
Yeah, I used to work where there was only 5 days of bereavement. I didn't lose anyone during that time, but now knowing what I know about death, I was like, how do people, even funeral planning, you need more time for that, and I think obviously the companies they have to make money, right? But I think they forget, like what Davina said, is that employees aren't looking to rig the system and take off like 2 months of work. When they've lost someone, a lot of times I feel like we want a sense of normalcy back in our lives. And so sometimes going back to work, having a chat about like, oh my gosh, did you see in the news the latest like celebrity news and stuff like that, instead of dwelling and talking about what we've gone through, or and I think just like that flexibility of taking bereavement days, because it comes in waves, like it's not one of those things where like it's gonna last for 2 weeks straight and it's gonna be over. Like, I think in the beginning of this episode, Davina, you were saying like months later, it just came randomly one day and it just hits you out of nowhere. But the next day you can be totally fine, be like, yeah, I'm fine going back to work. And I think I wish employers and companies understood that more, and just the fact that, yeah, we're grieving, but there's some people that always rig the system, but a lot of us aren't. We just want to go back to work and have a normal life again.
Yeah, and that 15 days feels like a very sort of congressional privilege like number, because when, a lot of times when someone passes, like Davina, you're talking about, like your mom had a full on change her life and like move in with you guys, right? So it's like you're not just dealing with emotions. Like some people's entire lives are completely uprooted, like whole rugs are pulled from under you, like financial situations can change, like relationships are broken, new people come into your life, like there's all these like other like just operational adjustments that sometimes have to be made that you can't just like hash out in 2 weeks, right? So I feel like the 15 days is just like, yeah, if you're like super rich, you could just, and you have everything set and like, don't have to move houses and like reorient, I don't know. So yeah, hopefully over time that will change, things will start moving a little bit more towards like human centered policy.
And what does your grief look like today? And do you think, have you gotten over it, or do you think you'll ever get over the loss of a loved one?
I think it's just something that you end up just living with. Like it becomes a part of you. Like your arm is always there. It's kind of like that. I think it's more noticeable some days, and then others it just kind of lays dormant. But I think what people don't realize about grief is that it's not linear. They talk about the 7 stages of grief. You don't go through those 7 stages one after another. Sometimes months later you're angry. A year later you can feel guilt. Sometimes you can feel completely over it, and then 2 years later you start the process all over again. You just don't know how you're going to feel in the future.
For me, it's been super weird. Since, this was my partner, and now I'm like, do I start dating again? Do I feel okay about that? Because it's been like 3 years as of like last week. So, and I feel like I'm okay enough to start dating again, but then I'm like, do I tell my future partner? Like, because since it's such a big part of my life, and then at what point do I tell them? I don't know. So it's I guess I will figure out when the time comes.
I think it's important to include that with, future partners, because I feel like anybody who cares about you, they're going to want to know your journey and how you got to dating them. And I've heard a lot of stories of people who, were married or, were in long-term relationships, and they ended up having that person pass, and their new significant other, will commemorate that person still. And like on the anniversary of, their passing, they'll do something nice for their significant other. I feel like if somebody truly cares about you, they're gonna care. You can't be jealous of someone who's dead.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what's gonna happen. You're not gonna date a ghost. I mean, I don't think you are, but it's like, you just
Well,
have
now
to
I'm going to.
now challenge accepted. No.
This
You
is my
just kind
ghost
of have
boyfriend.
to, yeah, that's just a part of the person you care about,
Yes, if it's important to your partner, it should be important to you.
And I don't look at it any different than if, a parent passed away or you had a sibling that passed away, because that person was an important person in your life. And like my husband, he didn't care for my dad very much, and he still supported me, and I just feel like that's how it should be, no matter your relationship with the person that's deceased now.
The grieving process for me was pretty quick, for all the reasons I shared before. So nowadays, if anybody asks me about my dad, I always just tell him, like, he made an impact on a lot of people's lives. He was a good person, and I don't think he regretted where he was going in his life, because again, he was a religious person. So passing away is just returning home to God. So in that sense, whether or not I believe it, he believed it. And I think for a lot of people, it's a lot more difficult when someone you love passes away with a lot of regret versus passing away at peace, towards the end of the life. So for me, he was, at least as far as I knew, he was at peace. And so that grieving process was a lot faster.
It's also weird for me as well, because I feel like with grief, there's definitely not a timeline. But given when you have one loss after another back to back, it's definitely going to be, I mean, it could be, who knows, right? How long, and depending on your relationship and how close you were to that person. I know for me with my sister, I think I'm in a slightly better place, but I don't know if I don't know that I'm done with the grief, but at least now there was so much positivity between her and I, especially the last year of her life, because she really reconnected with me, and one of the only siblings aside from my brother where I really felt just really loved and was able and connected. With my dad, it was different because there's a lot of things that he didn't make right with all of his children, my mom, so much abuse and everything. And so nothing was really made right. And then all of a sudden he was just gone. So I'm still going through some anger now. And then with my niece, that was also sudden. But again, my connection with her, there were no regrets. Everything was just so positive, and I was able to see her before she suddenly passed. So I felt really, really, I think that helped me, where I was able to kind of at least, have that to kind of help me through. So I kind of feel like I was on a train that just kind of just steamrolled over and over again. So I think it's a little tricky when it's several people, but I think it's just going to take me maybe probably more time than usual. So if that made any sense, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I feel like you and me, Micah, when we were talking ran about our deaths, it's like we had so much loss in the span of like 2 years. Like we lost 3 people. And it made me question whether or not I prefer to have it that way and get it done and over with, or, but like you said, that feeling of like, do I ever get a break? Or is it better to be spread out like one death every 5 years?
Exactly. I kind of wished if I could have had a choice, I want to be able to catch my breath a little bit first. And because I'm such an emotional person and I feel more deeply than normal. So I just kind of thought, "Oh, wait, I can't breathe. Wait, I need more time. I need more time."
Yeah.
But yes, I remember we've talked before too. And it's just it's weird and it's just really trippy.
And for me, I vividly remember like at the 5-year mark after my mom passed away that I like when I woke up in the morning that grief wasn't like the first thing I felt. Um, and that was like that felt like a huge milestone for me because for so many years it's basically the only thing I really felt was grief. So I remember at the 5-year mark after she had passed, I was like, I felt like a person. I felt like a real life full person that had other emotions that could kind of surface. And unfortunately, that was like the first year we had COVID, right? So everything got shut down. So that was like a whole other level of grieving that I had to do during that year. Because I finally felt like I can pay my rent, like I can date, like I can finally like do life in a way that feels like whole. But then I couldn't because everything got like shut down. So that took me some time to like process, but um at least on an emotional level, for the most part, I was like, wow, like I know that I can access like these other parts of me that I knew existed, but just like had no space for like 15 years. And then fast forward to today, grieving still happens like occasionally, like some holidays, certain milestones. I kind of wish like she was here to celebrate with me. But sometimes I get these flashes that she's like standing next to me in these moments, or like that she is there anyways. So it's like kind of okay. Yeah, life feels a lot better now. It was really bad for a long time. So I have access to so many more emotions now that I just didn't before, and just so many other like feelings and sensations other than this like heavy stone of like depression. Um, a lot has shifted in my family. So I had a lot of falling out with a lot of family members, which I won't like super get into, but it did have to do with like my mother's passing and sort of the role that I was expected to fill. That was just entirely unfair. So that has kind of been wrapped up in the whole experience of her death as well. But generally speaking, like I feel very grateful to be where I'm at now, like emotionally, even physically where I'm at. I'm just like at a level of joy that for a long time I wasn't sure would be possible. So not that every day is perfect, but I mean, it's just so much lighter now than it was in the past.
Well, thank you, each and every one of you, for coming and on the show, talking and being just so raw and vulnerable about a topic that needs to be spoken about more often. And I hope that anyone listening in that's going through the same thing could find some comfort and peace in knowing that the stages of grief and loss it takes time. It can be quick for some people, and there's so many layers to it. So again, thank you, all of you guys, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Hey there, friend. One tip I forgot to add in this conversation was something I personally learned with when I dealt with death, and other people I've spoken with agreed with this. If you had a choice to come to support someone either the week before the funeral or after the funeral, it'd be helpful to actually visit after the funeral. I remember the week before the funeral of my mom passing away, it felt like rush hour. So many people were at the house visiting, yet after the funeral, no one came to visit, and it felt so silent and so empty. And also, after this podcast conversation, my friend Omega shared with me that the funeral planning guide that I created helped him and his friends tremendously. They actually said it was a godsend to them because no one knows how many decisions you have to make when planning a funeral, or even the legal things you have to deal with and who to call. So I have my end of life planner freebie, which I'll include down the show notes. And I highly encourage discussing and going over it with your loved ones if possible, because the ones that don't and pass away suddenly, it made it so much more difficult for the family. So I hope you found today's conversation to be incredibly eye-opening to the complex layers that can come with death, grief, and loss, and how it can look differently, yet oh so the same for each person. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What insight or key points did you find helpful out of today's conversation? And if you already lost a loved one, were you able to relate to what the guest speakers were talking about? And if you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on any episodes coming up. And it'll really help us reach more of our vibrant community. I'd also be really grateful if you left me a review over on Apple and Spotify too, as those reviews help other people find my podcast. And remember, the magic continues over at thehappyhealingshop.com, where we keep the conversations going strong, and you'll find tons of resources to help you and support you, including the End of Life Planner freebie. Until we meet again, my friend, always remember to shine your light brightly and to share your story, because you'll never know who it can help, give comfort to, or inspire to create a change in their own world. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you soon.